Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another Joy of SharePoint webinar. We're going to get started here in just a minute. I want to make sure we give time for folks to join who may be running a minute or so late. So make sure you've got your caffeinated beverage of choice available, because you can't do SharePoint without caffeine. And we will officially get started here in just another minute. Okay, well, welcome again. I show it's 12:01 Central Time, so 1:01 for you Easterners out there. So we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Joy with Pate Group, and I have with us today Joe Wendt with InnerJoin, and he's going to be talking with us about Dynamics 365 and CRM. Joe, how you doing today?
Good. Good. I'm doing well.
Appreciate you taking the time to come visit with us.
No problem.
So for those of us like me that have never really done much with Dynamics 365, give us a little background. What are we going to be talking about today, and what is it about this piece of Office 365 that you feel really gives us a lot of value in our business lives?
Well, Dynamics 365 is what Microsoft has formerly called Dynamics CRM. The real benefit to SharePoint and Dynamics together is what Microsoft has done is it's given us a good place to store small and large files that are accessible to people with Dynamics licensing and within your organization. So the ability to collaborate with folks that may or may not need the extra licensing, as well as Dynamics with SharePoint creates a good folder structure under your accounts to manage all of your documents.
Gotcha. And is that primarily what you guys over at InnerJoin work with day in and day out?
Yes, so we are a Microsoft partner. We do Dynamics 365 implementations, as well as we work with the PaaS systems in Azure as they pertain to business intelligence, along with Power BI. So we try to take sales and marketing data, collect it within CRM, so implementing CRM systems, and then dispensing it to the business through technologies like Power BI, machine learning, and developing pipelines in between the other technologies.
Okay, awesome. And I've seen some of your work in action, and I really appreciate the way I can still use my familiar SharePoint environment to get to all this really good data. And I know you've got some demos ready, so show us what you got. Let's see the magic in action.
Sure. So real quick, what we'll be covering today, we'll go over quickly how documents are managed in Dynamics. Then, of course, how documents are stored by Dynamics within SharePoint, how we can access those documents in Dynamics and SharePoint. And then a little bit extra, there's a OneNote integration with Dynamics 365 that uses the SharePoint connection and stores the OneNote notebook within SharePoint. So I'll go over how that works. And then if we have a little bit of time, just what our limitations are or aren't based on Dynamics 365 and SharePoint's open APIs. Really, we're going to be mostly covering out-of-the-box situations and integrations between Dynamics 365 and SharePoint, but there's a lot of plugins to CRM or Dynamics 365 that you can leverage, as well as creating your own using JavaScript, C# code, and the APIs available in both systems. So we can kind of, if there's questions about that, we can answer those questions as well.
Perfect.
So I'll go ahead and get started. So we are on our sandbox. We have a Dynamics 365 sandbox as well as a SharePoint sandbox. For those of you that are not familiar with Dynamics 365, what you're looking at right now is an account within Dynamics. Everybody who's Microsoft junkie should be familiar with the VentureWorks company. So what we see here is all of your basic information about an account. We can see the basic account information, address information. We have activities that we can record. So these are phone calls, emails. We can place notes on the account. And we see this new tab for OneNote, which we'll get into a little bit later. Dynamics also has a partnership with Inside View. This is an add-in that comes with your licensing of Dynamics that pulls data about these companies from the web, and you can kind of see where they're coming from, and you can do some lead mining and all that other stuff, which we won't cover. But you know, this is your basic account page for the Dynamics application. So we're going to be discussing just basic document storage. So in the case of AdventureWorks, maybe I have a legal document, a CDA, something like that that we need to store underneath the account. What Dynamics has done with the integration of SharePoint is Dynamics is a database-driven application. So you can add documents in Dynamics to notes. I can attach this here. I'm limited to, I believe, a maximum file size of about 32 megabytes, and that's all dictated on what your settings are in Dynamics. So Dynamics out of the box is really limited in storing documents. If I would save this document onto this record, it would be saved in binary to the database. You're limited to the size of your database, and so what you don't want to have done in Dynamics is start storing documents in a database structure. So that's where SharePoint becomes really powerful. What we can do is by turning on the integration, which is a really, really easy task to do, we can bubble up a document storage. So if I go to Documents on the account, we'll notice that we're in the AdventureWorks account still. And what we are presented with are some commands up here and a list of items. So when we set up the SharePoint integration, what it does in SharePoint is it creates a document library. And for our instance, we have, well, let me get to the base or the root. What it does is it creates an account folder. And if you're in an account, say AdventureWorks, it will generate a folder within that root with the company's name. It also generates underscore, and then it adds the GUID or the unique identifier for that company. That way, if you have multiples, it knows how to separate them apart. So what we can do in here is we can add new documents if we'd like. So we have all of our typical Office 365 offerings, or we can upload documents. You can upload any document you want, just like you can in SharePoint. So if I wanted to create a new Word document, I'd click the Word button. I can name it. Confidentiality agreement. I can click Save. And what Dynamics is going to do is it's going to save the document in SharePoint as a blank document. So if I go to AdventureWorks now, we'll see that our document's been saved in here. And I can then click on this and open it in the online Office tools and edit the document here. You can also open it with your local Word version as well. So now what we can do is we can start, editing these documents, saving these documents, and we have a record of, all of the documents that are associated with this account. Okay. So, that's the really quick version of this. Not to mention, so not just only accounts, but like you can save documents under contacts. You can save documents under opportunities. So if you have documents that are specific to an opportunity, we could go in and save a document under an opportunity. It would generate an actual folder under the account and for that opportunity, and then it would stuff all the documents for that opportunity in that folder.
Okay, so that way, folder structure per client.
Correct.
Gotcha.
And then you can start seeing all those documents from the account because it'll bubble them all up, or individual documents for its child entities, which would be opportunities, leads, contacts, pretty much any entity that you create. You can even do this with custom entities. So if you have an entity or a database table that you need to create in Dynamics, you can create that. If you're going to save documents to it, you can save the documents to that entity, and then it'll be filed correctly under all those items within Dynamics CRM.
Gotcha. So I know some of my diehard SharePoint folks out there are kind of looking at the folders going, oh, folders in SharePoint. Right. But I've got a feeling we could create some custom views, leave the default view alone and create some custom views behind it if we needed to sort and filter different ways. Would that mess up anything inside of Dynamics?
No, and you can also change the way it saves documents. So if you want them to all be saved under one folder and one library, you could do that. You would just go in and change the default method of it saving documents.
You definitely want to do your metadata homework ahead of time if you're going to do that, I'm sure.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
There are also ways to add metadata upon saving of documents to SharePoint as well.
Awesome.
So, for example, if you're in an account and you need to save a document for AdventureWorks and you want to include data from the AdventureWorks file or the AdventureWorks record in CRM, maybe they're a relationship type, you could then populate that over into SharePoint from AdventureWorks customer record so that they're not entering that data twice.
Fantastic. Okay.
So we've created plugins that have had uploads that rest on these account pages where they can upload the document directly on the account instead of going to this wizard and set expiration dates and all that other fun stuff within the documents. And that way those expiration dates get published over to the metadata in SharePoint.
Oh, that's nice. That keeps it nice and clean.
Right, and it's all done, and that's where the custom API code comes in. There are also plugins that you can purchase that override the core functionality of the core integration that will request required metadata tags. So when we upload a document here, it would then pop up questions about okay, well, what metadata is required before you can upload this document.
Okay.
Fill that out. Is there any questions so far with kind of what we're covering?
I don't see any that have been submitted yet. You guys do
Okay.
feel free to submit questions in the little question panel. Keeping a close eye on that for everybody.
So there is one limitation to the upload out of the box features of CRM and uploading documents. Obviously, SharePoint has an extremely high limit on file size. From CRM, the limit is 50 megabytes, but say we were to save a document that was over 50 megs, we could save it in SharePoint and it would trickle down to CRM. So if and this is not a 50 meg file, but I will upload it anyway.
We pretend it is.
Right. So if I wanted to go in and save this logo that was enormous, maybe artwork or something like that. Everybody knows how big artwork can get. If I save it there, and I accidentally uploaded it twice, but that's okay. If I go in here and refresh this page now, I will see the GIF come over to CRM. So it's two ways. If people are managing documents that are not accessible or they don't have permissions in CRM, they can still get to these records from SharePoint.
Okay. So we do have a couple questions now. Can you talk about the different CRM SharePoint Online integration options, such as list, server, Office 365 group, and any pros and cons?
So you have the options to do the integration between on-prem and online. So CRM Online and on-prem can integrate with SharePoint online and on-prem, just depending on the versions that you're on. Off the top of my head, I think it's 2013 version of SharePoint on-prem and above. And then if you're on CRM 2016 or earlier, there are some hurdles that you do have to jump through with certificates and other items that make it not as straightforward as it should be. If you're going online to online, the setup is about a total of, on the CRM side, maybe 10 minutes, and then it's set up.
Gotcha.
So it's there's a wizard that you go in and just click next on a few times, and the integration's just done. It's amazingly fast.
That sounds spooky. I'm not used to SharePoint being
Right.
fast, so to hear that something goes fast, that's scary.
Right.
Can we use our Office 365 groups to give people access into Dynamics? Does it respect those?
So Dynamics has its own role-based system. So the quick answer is no. You have to explicitly assign a Dynamics role to a person. So no.
Okay. Yeah. Nope. I'm sure it's coming eventually.
Level. Yeah, so Dynamics has field level security, which you need to have specific rights for. So.
Okay, gotcha. That makes sense. Let me see what else we got in here. Can you have a document in multiple folders, or do you need to make copies of it? So can you point to the same document in multiple folders?
I think that would be a SharePoint question. I believe you would have to have it in multiple folders for it to show up in CRM. CRM doesn't have a database of these files. It is literally pulling a, hey, SharePoint, give me what all is included in this folder.
So from the SharePoint perspective, that would mean if you wanted to see it inside multiple folders, that would be multiple copies. Or if you're using a modern version, you could perhaps look at pinning it to the top of that library and have it in the folder where it makes the most sense. Or
Right.
perhaps start working with views rather than folders, I think.
Right. Yeah. So one thing to note is the integration to CRM. Like if you're thinking of it in the like thinking about it on the back end is CRM's not keeping a record of each one of these files in its database. The only record CRM has is where does the document library live for this record, and it's just a folder path. And then it uses the SharePoint API to say, hey, what's in this folder path? And then that's what renders up these items.
Okay.
So in theory, so with that said, if you upload a document here in SharePoint or CRM's offline, it's not trying to say, hey, CRM, write this new file to your database through the API. It's just saving it here. And then when SharePoint or CRM would come back online, it would have it there.
Okay. Okay, we've got a couple other questions. Let me see. The Teams one, I'm going to circle back to that one. I've got that question myself. And then there's some permissions and some settings questions. Do you think it would make sense to address those towards the end, or do you want to go ahead and dive into them now?
I can dive into them now.
All right. So there's a request to see the settings of the connection between SharePoint and Dynamics 365.
Sure.
Okay.
So the settings are located under document management. So when you first enter in here, you'll see an icon for basic SharePoint, setting up SharePoint. It goes away once you do the initial setup. So all that does is it asks you where the site's located. So if I have a site, so like this is our demo site, I just tell it, okay, here is the site that I want, and here's some information about it. Like, you know, if you want to allow embedding of Power BI reports, you'd toggle that to yes. So you set up this, you know, SharePoint site, and then what you can do is once the SharePoint site's set up, you tell it which records you want to synchronize with SharePoint. So we go to document management settings, and then this is where we can tell CRM what entities are allowed to share or save documents in CRM. So by default, and these are the default check marks that we allowed, but you can check mark any type of entity, even custom entities that you may create in CRM. We are allowing the account, an article, let's see, category, expense,
So
knowledge articles, leads. So this is where you set it up and you tell it, okay, here's the site that I want to save these entities to.
So an entity in Dynamics is a column in SharePoint.
No. So an entity in CRM is a folder in SharePoint.
Gotcha. Yes. Okay. I'm rocking and rolling now.
So, and it depends on, cancel that. So, and you can have multiple locations. So you'll notice in document locations in CRM, every time we create a new folder in SharePoint, we create a new record of where that folder or where that's located for that company in CRM. So that's the only record of, okay, Adatum Corporation. This is where its default library lives in SharePoint. It doesn't keep record of each file.
Gotcha. Let's see what else we got here. How does the out-of-the-box integration function with the CRM Portal solution? And do you have to use Do you have to connect 365 or is there an out-of-the-box integration?
So depending on the portal, you would more than likely have to create your own API call to pull the data that you wanted down into the portal. We have not integrated with a custom portal yet on the built or one of the portals that is created from Dynamics 365 to SharePoint. So off the top of my head, I'm going to have to say I'd have to look that up, but I believe that you'd have to pull the documents that you want through the API.
Gotcha. And do you have any recommendations when it comes to managing security between SharePoint Online and Dynamics? It does sound like that's all managed separately. So you would probably want to be more secure with who can put things in Dynamics and then allow more of a general population access to SharePoint. Am I thinking about that right?
Correct. So normally what you'll have is Dynamics users will have, you'll have less Dynamics users, obviously, than you'll have SharePoint users, considering Dynamics licensing comes with a SharePoint license. So normally your users in CRM, their security is dictated a little bit more strictly, just because of, on an account, I can have somebody that can edit a certain field in CRM that another person can't. And then of course in SharePoint, I believe you can do group policies with access to certain libraries and all that. So the only thing that you really need to do in SharePoint is make sure that your CRM group has access to write or read or do whatever they want in the library that CRM's writing to.
Okay, and so other than that, they don't really pay attention to each other's settings. Everybody just does their own thing.
Right, because Dynamics's roles are controlled on their own.
Gotcha. That makes sense. What else we got? Are you creating and deleting SharePoint site collections from Dynamics? I'm going to say it doesn't seem that way, but you can correct me if I'm wrong.
No, site collections. So for instance, our sandbox, I set up, this one just specifically this morning. I went into SharePoint and I just created one site for this. And then it doesn't create collections. It writes to that one site within the file structure that you've recognized when you set up the integration. So it'll ask you, I believe you have two choices on how you want documents to be stored in SharePoint. For this instance, I chose to have all documents stored under the account level. Mm-hmm. So awesome. It doesn't create like site collections for each individual account.
Unlike Teams, but that's a conversation for another day, right, guys? So what was the last thing? Is there a particular site template that you would recommend for this to use, or it doesn't care? It's just using that connection to drop stuff wherever it's pointed to.
It just uses the connection to drop things. So for instance, if we go into site contents here, mm-hmm. and we look at content, you'll see your basic documents folder, but then you'll see account, article, category, expense, form templates, knowledge, articles, leads, opportunities, products. So these are all the entities that we've allowed it to write. So these are the entities, and these are the folders in which it would then dump files. So if we would upload an expense, it would create a folder under expense for that expense, and then start writing all the files to that.
Gotcha. So it doesn't care, team site, publishing site, modern site. It just needs to be able to write and create its libraries and folders.
Right. It just creates document libraries and writes to those folders. It's like the most basic form of SharePoint.
I like it. Hey, is the way to go. Excellent. Well, that's got us through our questions list.
We can go over like OneNote real quick. It's not much different than what I just showed you. but it is a pretty powerful tool that we have clients clamoring about quite a bit because everybody is now on the OneNote train.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody's kind of embraced OneNote, and it's a pretty nice feature. So within Dynamics, if I'm on an account or any record that we allow OneNote integrations on, OneNote's nice because what you can do is you can have multiple people working on a OneNote notebook.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is when I click this OneNote button, it's going to automatically open OneNote for me and create a notebook. This then is, it doesn't save this notebook under your personal notebooks like you may be used to. It creates its own notebook. That way, if there's multiple people working out of this account, they can open this and add to the notebook and remove things from the notebook or work simultaneously on the notebook. So it's more of a collaborative use of OneNote instead of like an individual use of OneNote. So in all of it, all of this does is, it'll open up in OneNote Online and let you edit whatever you would like. It also allows that OneNote to be stored here right on the home page of the account. But if I go into the documents area of Dynamics 365, we'll notice that it adds a OneNote document in that library. So if I don't have access to SharePoint and I go to the account folder, and then if I go to Datum Corporation, I'll notice that the OneNote document's there, and I can then, see the collaboration in CRM if I don't have a CRM license in SharePoint, but I can also add to the collaboration right here. That way my CRM users can see, any additions that were made in OneNote for that item. So it stores all that in SharePoint for us.
That's nice. Then you don't have to worry about whoever, if it were a personal one, you always worry about them, winning the lottery and moving to Tahiti.
Right.
Goes away.
Yeah, and I know like we have a lot of people, that kind of clamor about or, talk about how like, using metadata in here, is a little bit more difficult. But, for the people working out of CRM, CRM's doing a really good job of using SharePoint for these larger files and keeping all these files out of a database, which makes migration, really, really difficult on us. But it also allows them to file all these documents and see all these documents wherever they want. So they know that they can go into Datum Corporation, and then if there is like a confidentiality agreement or something, they can pull it up just straight from here without having to leave and go to the SharePoint site or go anywhere else and try to find it. It's all stored underneath these one locations.
Okay. So. Let's see, we have a question. Is it possible to pre-populate any of the Dynamics customer information into a SharePoint form, or maybe even forms, or may mean the list form, like the new item form?
Yes, so that wasn't necessarily a topic that we were going to go over, but I can kind of discuss it. So SharePoint or CRM now allows for data entities to be created, and then the actual source not live in CRM. So you can have remote sources in CRM. So if I wanted to create a new entity in CRM that referenced a SharePoint list, I could do that, and CRM would look like it was a native database or a table in CRM, but it would be located in SharePoint or the common data tables that, or the Power Apps applications that Microsoft's pushing real hard. It could also be some database table somewhere else. So kind of like you all have the ability to take a list and say, well, this list doesn't live in SharePoint, it lives in this ODBC connection. CRM can kind of now do that with SharePoint and other locations as well.
Okay. Okay.
And you can also run like workflows. So if there's like a workflow that we would want to run off of an account here, so if, say, I created an action in here that was, if this relationship type is moved from, prospect to customer, I want this data written to a SharePoint list. We could use the SharePoint API to create a workflow in CRM that uses the SharePoint API to write directly to SharePoint, or even vice versa. So SharePoint could, based on something, write data to CRM as well.
Okay, so we've got a two-way superhighway going on here. That's nice. Yeah. Very good. What else we got? Set up the Office 365 group or CRM Online Integration, and how do you keep it from getting out of hand with creating many Office 365 groups?
Say that again. I kind of lost you at the beginning.
So the question is, have you set up the Office 365 group and CRM Online Integration? If so, how do you keep it from getting out of hand with creating so many Office 365 groups?
Office 365 groups.
Well, I don't think we kind of touched on this earlier, but correct me if I'm wrong or if I misunderstood, that there's really not Office 365 group integration for Dynamics at this point.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, are you referring to like group policy or?
See, so Rob, if you've got some more information for us on that, if like the group policy, or if you're thinking just of the how
like security groups, is that what he's referring to?
Let's see if we get some more information on that. He's going to look up a reference. Awesome.
Okay.
Can user posts be moderated on the home page? So like, do you mean the notes, Naveen, the notes that people can write when they're on the customer page?
So are you talking about posts in between in SharePoint, or in Dynamics 365?
See if we get a little bit more information on that. While we wait for clarification, yes, posts on the homepage in Dynamics. So those posts there.
Right. So these posts are all these posts come from either actions within Dynamics or your internal, users essentially. I've never had anybody ask about, moderating these posts. You could set up, custom workflows to approve them if you needed to, but by default, if you post something, it posts. But if you needed a checksum in there, you could definitely do it with a custom workflow.
Gotcha. So this kind of reminds me of how Teams integrates with SharePoint. So I could have a tab on my team channel where I could upload content and that surfaces over in a SharePoint site. Is there any integration with Dynamics 365 and Teams at this point? Or if not, have you heard any rumors about that?
I have not heard of any rumors, but then again, I have not looked it up either.
Okay. I mean, things change so often right now with anything Office 365. But I would think since this is cloud-based, we could probably link to this in our team so we could have it on a tab to get to it through our channels.
Right.
So that's
with the two APIs, you can really, synchronize the two systems to do however or whatever you really want. It really depends on, how much, do you want to take on and custom code.
Gotcha. I'm sure there's an opportunity for bots out there too.
Right. And then of course with flow and all that other stuff, you can. So,
Sky's the limit with flow. So go on looking through questions. I think we're answering them. Rob did get back to us with a little bit of information. Rob, I may need to forward these on to Joe so he can take a look at them. There's just a little bit of information out there on the interwebs from Microsoft on using a CRM connector for Office 365 groups.
mm-hmm.
But
yeah, there may be a custom connector for group policies to attribute certain CRM roles to a group.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'll forward you those links. That's always something, Rob. We can get back in touch with you and kind of dig through it and see what we can send your way.
There's
this
also
is really
a
fantastic.
big CRM community that creates there's a CRM Toolbox, XRM Toolbox it's called, that takes a lot of the administration and streamlines it with other tools within the Office 365 environment. So, if it's not out of the box, it's usually included in one of those toolkits
Gotcha.
that make user management especially a lot easier.
Now, this is really nice. I will say this is the deepest dive into Dynamics I've ever had. I was aware it existed, but not really ever done anything with it. And it's really nice to see how it's a tool that just steps right in line with our other document management tool, being SharePoint. And we can get to it from either place, but we're not dealing with multiple versions of the truth. We're not having to jump through a lot of hoops. Security is not an issue. We can control that however it's needed. I mean, this looks like a really nice tool set. What's your favorite thing to do with it? What's your favorite feature with Dynamics?
I really like just the way that they've gotten the user interface to kind of be almost as a one-page application. My favorite thing about Dynamics is the fact that they've leveraged a lot of basic web tools inside of it to allow us to really do whatever we want. So the custom portals that you can now attach to it and have at your disposal for your website, that's all, CSS and HTML. You can customize it however you want. You can make it look however you want. This whole front end can be changed and widgets can be added using basic HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. The REST API is very, very easy to use. So, if there are cumbersome activities within Dynamics that sales teams just don't want to deal with, they want it to be a little bit more streamlined and, almost wizard-like, we can go in and literally add whatever we want using, non-custom languages. We're using JavaScript and CSS and HTML to do it, which is really nice. You can also create plugins for the application in C# that can do a host of things. We have plugins that talk to NetSuite and different applications here and there that you could never do without the use of C# and a object-oriented language like that. So they've really opened it up to us to really make it whatever it needs to be if we need to go that far. So that's probably my favorite thing about it.
So as simple or as complex as you want it, it can pretty much be done.
Yep. And the nice part is too, if you get licensing, you get a sandbox with it. So
yay!
Yeah, they've made it really, really easy to manipulate however you need. We have lots of clients, and some just use it straight out of the box, and some want all kinds of fancy gadgets within it, and we're able to kind of help everybody out. So
yeah. I got one more question that came in, and you guys, we still got some time if you have more questions out there. Michael's asking, he says, just to make sure, so users with no permission to Dynamics, also external users, I'm guessing you mean external users that have been invited into SharePoint, can upload documents to the SharePoint library, and we will be able to see that in Dynamics 365.
Yes. Yep.
Perfect.
So there's no roles that Dynamics is pushing onto SharePoint. So any role that you give your SharePoint users, whether it's connected to Dynamics or not, it will operate just like SharePoint would have. SharePoint really has no idea that CRM's connected to it.
Ah. And CRM's not looking back going, wait a minute, you're an external user. I don't want what you got. So it's nice.
Nope.
Everybody's playing well together.
Yeah, there's no integration. So to set up the integration between SharePoint and CRM, there is nothing that you do in SharePoint as long as it's online. As long as both versions are online. Now, if they're not both online, then you get into certificates and PowerShell commands, and that's a whole nother topic. But if they're both online, there's nothing that you touch in SharePoint. Literally, to set it all up, you just go into CRM and you tell it what library you want to write to, and that's all it does.
Just turns into a Dropbox.
Essentially, that's what it is.
Lowercase, of course. Right. Okay, fantastic. Well, Joe, really appreciate you coming, sharing this information with us. Again, this is a great deep dive for me. I personally had never really seen a lot of this in action. Our guests out there today probably knew more about it than I did coming in, but we really appreciate your time. Do we have any more questions out there that you want to be asked before we let Joe sneak away and we all get back and find some lunch? And Rob, we will be following up with you. Don't worry, we won't forget about you. And as always, this is being recorded. So if you know anyone that couldn't make it today or you think would like to see this presented, because maybe this is a solution you need inside of your organization, the recording will be available in about 2 hours or so. All right, well, Joe went with InnerJoin Technologies. We appreciate you coming. Feel free to come join us anytime, and everybody else, we'll let you get back to your day.
All right, well, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.